ground is frozen, every breath cuts like a knife. It's April 1945, somewhere on the collapsing Western Front of Nazi Germany. The town of Salzwedel lies in ruins behind him. Ahead, through the smoke and the chaos, American forces are advancing, and here, in this moment, pressed against the cold earth, 19-year-old Wolfram Forster has become invisible to everything except the sound of death moving through the air above him. Bullets crack overhead. The sound is constant, relentless. Machine gun fire rips through the air so close he can feel the displacement of air with each round. Somewhere to his left, he hears someone screaming. Whether in pain or terror, he can't tell. The smell of cordite and burning wood fills his nostrils. His fingers dig into the frozen dirt as if he could somehow burrow deeper, make himself smaller, disappear entirely. He's wearing the uniform of the Wehrmacht, the same uniform worn by millions of German soldiers who came before him. But Wolfram is not a career soldier. He's not a true believer in the Nazi cause. He's a teenager, drafted just 5 months ago, rushed through basic training, and sent to defend a position that everyone knows cannot be held. I-07 couldn't move, Wolfram would later recall, decades after that day. Every time I tried to lift my head, the shooting would start again. It was like they were waiting for me. I just pressed myself into the ground and waited. That's all you can do. Just wait. Time becomes meaningless in moments like this. Is he lying there for 5 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour? In his memory, it stretches into eternity, an endless present where the only certainty is the next bullet, the next explosion, the next heartbeat that might be his last. His mind races. Is this how it ends? In the dirt of a country that's already lost the war? Will his family ever know what happened to him? His mother, his father, do they even know where he is right now? Around him, the Third Reich is in its death throes. Berlin is surrounded by Soviet forces. Hitler is hiding in a bunker. The 1,000-year Reich that was supposed to dominate Europe has maybe days left. But the bullets don't know that. The artillery doesn't care about the broader strategic situation. And for Wolfram, none of that matters. All that matters is surviving the next minute. He thinks about the path that brought him here, the draft notice that arrived last November, the abbreviated training, the Christmas celebration that never happened, the illness that took him off the front lines for a few precious weeks, the reassignment to Salzwedel. Every small decision and random chance that led to this exact moment, pressed into the frozen ground, waiting to die. And then something changes. The shooting slows, then stops. The sudden silence is almost more terrifying than the noise. What does it mean? In war, silence can be more dangerous than gunfire. Is this the moment before an artillery barrage? Are enemy soldiers flanking his position? Should he move? Should he stay perfectly still? His ears are ringing from the constant noise. He can hear his own breathing, harsh and quick. His heart is hammering against his ribs. He listens, straining to understand what's happening. Then he hears voices. American voices, boots on the ground moving closer. Commands in English, a language he doesn't fully understand. But he knows what it means. They've won. He's about to be captured. Rough hands grab him, pull him to his feet. American soldiers, GIS in their distinctive helmets and uniforms, surround him. They search him for weapons, their movements efficient and professional. One of them says something to him, gesturing for him to put his hands up. Wolfram complies. He's shaking from fear, from cold, from the adrenaline that's been flooding his system. But as they march him away from the front line, away from the gunfire that's still echoing in the distance, a strange feeling washes over him. relief. Wolfram Forster's war is over. He's a prisoner, but he's alive. In a conflict that will ultimately kill somewhere between 70 and 85 million people, he has survived. What happens next, the journey from that frozen April day to a new life half a world away, is a story that needs to be heard. Because Wolfram's experience isn't just about one soldier in one battle. It's about what happens when young people are caught up in historical forces beyond their control. It's about survival, resilience, and the long shadow that war casts over those who experience it. This is Memoirs of World War II. I'm Josh, and today we're going to hear something you don't often get in history books: the perspective of a German soldier who was drafted into Hitler's army during the final desperate months of the Third Reich. Before we go any further, I want to be clear about what this video is and what it isn't. This is not an apologia for Nazi Germany. This is not an attempt to create false equivalence between the Axis and Allied powers. The Nazi regime was responsible for crimes on a scale that almost defies comprehension: the Holocaust, the systematic murder of 6 million Jews, the genocide of Roma, disabled people, and others deemed undesirable, the brutal occupation of Europe, and a war of aggression that killed tens of millions. But within that historical reality, there are also individual stories. Stories of people, particularly young people, who had no power to stop what was happening, who were drafted into a military machine they didn't create, and who had to find ways to survive and make sense of their experience. Wolfram Forster was one of those people. His story isn't about ideology or politics. It's a story about what war actually does to the people forced to fight it. It's about living under a totalitarian regime, where even expressing doubt could get you killed. It's about the randomness of survival, and it's about what comes after, how you build a life when you've seen the worst that humanity can do. But to understand Wolfram's story, to understand how a teenager ends up lying in the dirt, waiting to die in a war that's already lost, we need to go back before the gunfire, before the draft notice, before the war itself. We need to understand how Germany arrived at this moment and what it was like to be a young person living under one of history's most brutal regimes. To understand how Wolfram Forster ended up in that frozen field in April 1945, we need to go back 27 years earlier. Back to November 11th, 1918. The Great War, what we now call World War I, ends at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. Germany surrenders. After 4 years of industrial slaughter that killed roughly 17 million people, the guns finally fall silent. But for Germany, this is just the beginning of a national trauma that will shape everything that follows. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in June 1919, is designed with one primary goal: ensure that Germany can never threaten Europe again. The terms are crushing. Germany loses 13% of its European territory and all of its overseas colonies. The Rhineland is demilitarized. The German military is limited to just 100,000 men, a tiny fraction of the force that had fought the war. Germany is forbidden from having an air force, submarines, or tanks. But perhaps most devastating of all, Article 231, what becomes known as the War Guilt Clause, forces Germany to accept sole responsibility for causing the war. And with that responsibility comes a bill: reparations so massive that Germany will be paying them for generations. For many Germans, this isn't peace, it's humiliation, it's victor's justice, and it creates a wound in the German national psyche that never fully heals. The 1920s in Germany are marked by chaos and suffering. In 1923, hyperinflation reaches levels that are almost incomprehensible. At its peak, a single US dollar is worth 4.2 trillion German marks. People carry money in wheelbarrows to buy bread. Life savings become worthless overnight. The middle class, the backbone of any stable society, is wiped out. Political violence erupts in the streets. Communist and fascist paramilitary groups fight pitched battles. Political assassinations become routine. The Weimar Republic, Germany's first real attempt at democracy, struggles to maintain legitimacy. It's associated in many Germans' minds with defeat, humiliation, and economic collapse. Into this chaos steps a man who will change the course of human history. Adolf Hitler is a failed artist and a World War I veteran. He's a gifted orator with a talent for tapping into resentment and rage. In the beer halls of Munich, he begins building a following with a message that's seductive in its simplicity. Germany didn't lose the war on the battlefield, Hitler claims. It was betrayed from within, stabbed in the back by socialists, communists, and Jews who undermined the war effort. The Treaty of Versailles is a crime, an injustice that must be reversed. Germany is a great nation that deserves to dominate Europe, not grovel before its former enemies. And he knows exactly who to blame for Germany's suffering. Jews become the primary scapegoat, but Hitler's list of enemies is long. Communists, socialists, liberals, Democrats, intellectuals, anyone who supported the Weimar Republic. He promises to restore German greatness, to tear up the treaty, to rebuild the military, and to create a new German empire, a Third Reich that will last 1,000 years. At first, most people dismiss Hitler as a fringe extremist. In the 1928 elections, the Nazi Party wins just 2.6% of the vote. They're a joke, a curiosity, nothing to worry about. But then comes 1929 and the Great Depression. The global economic collapse hits Germany particularly hard. Unemployment soars, banks fail, businesses close. The fragile economic recovery of the mid-1920s evaporates. And suddenly, Hitler's message finds a much larger audience. People who are desperate, who are afraid, who are looking for someone to blame. They're willing to listen to a man who promises simple solutions to complex problems. In the 1930 elections, the Nazi Party wins 18.3% of the vote. By July 1932, they're the largest party in the German parliament with 37.3%. And on January 30th, 1933, President Paul von Hindenburg appoints Adolf Hitler as Chancellor of Germany. What happens next is a masterclass in how a democracy can be dismantled from within. On February 27, 1933, less than a month after Hitler takes power, the Reichstag building burns. Hitler blames communists and uses the fire as a pretext to suspend civil liberties. The Reichstag fire decree gives the government sweeping powers to arrest political opponents, suppress newspapers, and ban public gatherings. In March, the Enabling Act is passed, giving Hitler the power to enact laws without parliamentary approval. It's essentially the end of democracy in Germany, voted through by a parliament that has already been intimidated into submission. From this point on, the pace of change accelerates. Political opponents are arrested by the thousands and sent to the first concentration camps, initially created not for Jews, but for German political dissidents. The first camp, Dachau, opens in March 1933, just 2 months after Hitler takes power. Communist and social democratic leaders are imprisoned or flee the country. Independent newspapers are shut down. Trade unions are dissolved. The Gestapo, the secret police, is established to root out any opposition to the regime. The judiciary is purged of judges who might rule against the government. Universities are brought under Nazi control. Books are burned in massive public bonfires. The Hitler Youth is created to indoctrinate children from an early age. Every aspect of German society is being systematically transformed to serve the Nazi ideology. And then there are the racial laws. In 1935, the Nuremberg Laws are enacted, stripping German Jews of citizenship and forbidding marriage or sexual relations between Jews and non-Jews. Jewish businesses are boycotted. Jewish professionals are forced out of their jobs. The persecution that will eventually culminate in the Holocaust has begun. But here's what's crucial to understand. The Nazi regime doesn't just rely on violence. It also relies on propaganda, on creating a sense of national revival, on giving people something to believe in. For Germans who aren't targeted by the regime, who aren't Jewish, Roma, disabled, homosexual, or political dissidents, the Nazi years initially bring a sense of renewal. Unemployment drops as Hitler massively expands the military and begins enormous public works projects like the Autobahn. Germany tears up the Treaty of Versailles, rebuilding its armed forces in defiance of international law. The Rhineland is remilitarized. Austria is annexed. The Sudetenland is seized from Czechoslovakia. For many Germans, particularly those too young to remember World War I clearly, this feels like a national renaissance. Germany is strong again. Germany is respected, or at least feared again. The humiliation of 1918 is being erased. This is the world that Wolfram Forster is born into in 1926. He's 7 years old when Hitler takes power. He has no memory of the Weimar Republic, no memory of democracy. His entire childhood and adolescence are spent under Nazi rule. Everything was propaganda, Wolfram remembered decades later. The radio, the newspapers, the schools, they were preparing us for war even before it started. You didn't question it because you couldn't question it. And he was absolutely right. Questioning the Nazi regime could get you killed. The atmosphere of fear and surveillance in Nazi Germany is total. The Gestapo has informants everywhere. Neighbors inform on neighbors, children inform on parents, teachers inform on students. You never know who might be listening, who might report an offhand comment to the authorities. Wolfram recalled a story that stayed with him his entire life, a story that perfectly captures what it was like to live under Nazi rule. A dentist in his community, a professional man with a family, someone respectable, made the mistake of having a conversation about the war. It wasn't even particularly critical. He didn't say that Germany should lose or that Hitler was wrong. He just made a realistic assessment that things weren't going well for Germany on the battlefield. Someone overheard. Someone reported him to the Gestapo. The dentist was arrested within days. He was charged with defeatism, undermining the war effort by spreading pessimism. There was no real trial, no opportunity for defense. He was sentenced to death and executed. Think about that for a moment. Not for sabotage, not for espionage, not for helping the enemy, for expressing mild skepticism about how the war was going, for telling the truth about Germany's military situation. In Nazi Germany, reality itself could be a crime if it contradicted what the regime wanted people to believe. This is the world that shaped Wolfram and his entire generation, a world where you learned from an early age to keep your thoughts to yourself, where you understood that the wrong word at the wrong time could destroy not just you, but your entire family, where conformity wasn't just encouraged, it was survival. By the time Wolfram is old enough to truly understand what's happening around him, Germany is already deep in Hitler's grip. The regime has had years to consolidate power, to eliminate opposition, to create a totalitarian state where independent thought is dangerous and dissent is impossible. And the regime is preparing for war. That preparation is visible everywhere. The military is expanding rapidly. Young men are being trained. Factories are being converted to military production. The propaganda grows more aggressive, more militaristic. Hitler speaks constantly of Germany's need for Lebensraum, living space, which can only be acquired through conquest. For someone like Wolfram, a teenager growing up in this environment, the coming war must have seemed inevitable. Not something to hope for, necessarily, but something that couldn't be avoided. The entire society was being mobilized for conflict. Every institution, every organization, every aspect of life was being bent toward military preparation. And then, in September 1939, the war begins. September 1st, 1939, 4:45 a.m. German forces cross the border into Poland. The justification is a staged incident at a radio station, a false flag operation designed to give Hitler a pretext for invasion. But the real reason is simpler. Hitler wants war, and he's convinced that Britain and France won't actually fight to defend Poland. He's wrong about that last part. 2 days later, on September 3rd, Britain and France declare war on Germany. World War II has begun. The German assault on Poland is overwhelming. This is the world's first real demonstration of blitzkrieg, lightning war. German aircraft dominate the sky, bombing Polish airfields, destroying communications infrastructure, and terrorizing civilian populations. Panzer divisions punch through Polish defenses, encircling entire armies before they can retreat or regroup. The Polish military, brave but hopelessly outmatched, is torn apart. And then, on September 17th, the situation becomes hopeless. The Soviet Union, which has secretly agreed to partition Poland with Germany, invades from the east. Poland is caught in a vice between two totalitarian powers. By October 6th, organized Polish resistance has collapsed. Poland ceases to exist as an independent nation, carved up between Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia. For Hitler, it's an intoxicating victory. The military campaign that France and Britain promised would lead to Germany's defeat has instead resulted in the conquest of Poland in just over a month. And the Western Allies have done nothing but declare war. No military action, no attempt to relieve pressure on Poland, nothing. The autumn and winter of 1939 to 1940 is known as the Phony War, or Sitzkrieg, sitting war. British and French forces sit behind the Maginot Line, France's supposedly impregnable system of fortifications, and wait. German forces consolidate their control of Poland. Both sides seem to be waiting for the other to make the first move. That changes in April 1940. Germany invades Denmark and Norway. Denmark falls in hours, literally hours. The entire country is occupied in less than a day. Norway resists longer, but German control of the air and superior planning overwhelm Norwegian and British forces. By June, Norway has surrendered. But these are just the opening acts. The main event begins on May 10, 1940. German forces invade Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, all neutral countries, as a prelude to the assault on France. The world watches in shock as the supposedly invincible French military, supported by the British Expeditionary Force, begins to crumble. The problem is that everyone is fighting the last war. The Maginot Line is designed to stop a frontal assault like the one Germany launched in World War I. But Hitler's generals have learned from that mistake. Instead of attacking the Maginot Line directly, German forces sweep through the Ardennes forest, the same forest where Wolfram will fight 5 years later, which French military planners considered impassable for armored forces. They're wrong. Panzer divisions emerge from the Ardennes and race toward the English Channel, cutting Allied forces in two. The British Expeditionary Force and French units are trapped in a pocket around the port of Dunkirk. From May 26th to June 4th, an improvised fleet of British naval vessels and civilian boats evacuates over 330,000 Allied troops from the beaches, the miracle of Dunkirk. But they leave behind all their heavy equipment, and France is left to fight alone. France, the great power that had defeated Germany in World War I, the nation that had dominated European military affairs for centuries, collapses in just 6 weeks. On June 14th, German forces march into Paris. On June 22nd, France signs an armistice in the same railroad car where Germany had surrendered in 1918. Hitler personally oversees this moment of humiliation reversal, dancing a little jig for the cameras. The French government in Vichy becomes a puppet regime. Northern France is occupied. The war in the West appears to be over. For Wolfram, who is 13 years old at this point, the propaganda is overwhelming. Germany has achieved victories that seem almost miraculous. Poland, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and now France, all defeated in less than a year. The newsreels show triumphant German soldiers marching through conquered capitals. Hitler is portrayed as a military genius, a leader who has restored German greatness. Britain stands alone now, and Hitler expects them to negotiate. But under Winston Churchill, Britain refuses. The Battle of Britain begins in the summer of 1940, the German Luftwaffe attempting to destroy the Royal Air Force and prepare the way for an invasion. But the British pilots, fighting over their own territory with radar guidance, inflict unsustainable losses on German aircraft. By October, Hitler postpones the invasion of Britain indefinitely. Still, from the German perspective, the situation looks extraordinary. Germany has conquered most of Western Europe. The British are isolated on their island. The United States is still neutral. The German military appears unstoppable. And then Hitler makes the decision that will ultimately doom the Third Reich. On June 22, 1941, exactly 1 year after France's surrender, Germany invades the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa is the largest military invasion in human history. Over 3 million German soldiers, supported by Finnish and Romanian forces, attack along a front that stretches from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. They're supported by 3,000 tanks, 7,000 artillery pieces, and 2,500 aircraft. The objective is nothing less than the complete destruction of the Soviet Union and the creation of a German empire stretching to the Ural Mountains. Hitler has convinced himself that the Soviet Union is a house of cards that will collapse as soon as it's kicked in. He plans to defeat the Soviets in a matter of months before winter arrives. Initially, it looks like he might be right. The attack achieves complete surprise. Stalin has ignored numerous warnings about the invasion, convinced that Hitler won't attack while Britain is still undefeated. Soviet forces on the border are unprepared, poorly positioned, and in some cases still asleep when the German artillery barrage begins. German forces advance at an astounding pace. Within days, they've penetrated hundreds of miles into Soviet territory. Entire Soviet armies are encircled and destroyed. By July, German forces have captured Minsk and Smolensk, key cities on the road to Moscow. By September, Leningrad is under siege, and Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, has fallen. Over 600,000 Soviet soldiers are captured in a single encirclement battle at Kiev. The numbers are staggering. By November 1941, Germany has captured over 3 million Soviet prisoners of war. Thousands of Soviet aircraft have been destroyed, many of them on the ground. Vast swaths of Soviet territory containing crucial industrial resources and millions of people, are under German occupation, and then everything changes. First, the Soviet Union doesn't collapse. Despite catastrophic losses, the Red Army continues to fight. Stalin implements a ruthless scorched earth policy, destroying anything that might be useful to the Germans as they retreat. Soviet industry is evacuated east beyond the reach of German forces and reconstituted in the Ural Mountains and Siberia. New armies are raised to replace the ones that were destroyed. Second, the distances involved are far greater than German planners anticipated. Supply lines stretch to the breaking point. Trucks break down on the primitive Soviet roads. The German railway system uses different gauge tracks than the Soviet system, requiring time-consuming conversions. As German forces advance deeper into the Soviet Union, they move further from their supply bases and closer to Soviet reinforcements. Third, the weather turns. The autumn rains begin in October, turning the unpaved Soviet roads into rivers of mud. The German advance slows, then stops. Vehicles become mired. Artillery can't be moved. The offensive against Moscow stalls just as the German forces can see the spires of the Kremlin in the distance. And then comes winter. The winter of 1941 to 1942 is brutal, with temperatures dropping to 40 degrees below 0 Celsius. German forces are not prepared for this. They lack winter clothing, winter equipment, and winter supplies. Tanks won't start because the oil has frozen. Weapons malfunction. Soldiers suffer frostbite by the tens of thousands. Men are literally freezing to death in their positions. The Soviet forces, meanwhile, are equipped and trained for winter warfare. On December 5, 1941, Stalin launches a massive counter-offensive, driving German forces back from Moscow. For the first time in the war, the Wehrmacht is in full retreat. The myth of German invincibility is shattered. Hitler fires many of his top generals and takes personal command of the military. He issues his first stand-fast order. German forces are forbidden from retreating, regardless of the tactical situation. The war on the Eastern Front settles into a grinding stalemate through the winter. But the strategic situation has fundamentally changed. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. 4 days later, Hitler, for reasons that historians still debate, declares war on the United States. Germany is now fighting the Soviet Union, Britain, and the United States simultaneously. The industrial capacity of these three powers combined dwarfs Germany's resources. The war continues through 1942 and into 1943. In the summer of 1942, Germany launches a new offensive in the south, aiming to capture the oil fields of the Caucasus and the industrial city of Stalingrad on the Volga River. Stalingrad becomes the epicenter of the bloodiest battle in human history. From August 1942 to February 1943, German and Soviet forces fight street by street, building by building, sometimes room by room for control of the city. The combat is savage beyond description. Snipers pick off anyone who moves. Artillery reduces entire neighborhoods to rubble. The Volga River runs red with blood. Soldiers fight in sewers, in basements, in the ruins of factories. By November, German forces control about 90% of the city, but they can't capture the last 10%, and their supply situation is becoming desperate. On November 19th, the Soviets launch Operation Uranus, a massive counteroffensive that encircles the entire German Sixth Army in Stalingrad. Over 250,000 German soldiers are trapped. Hitler orders them to fight to the death. He forbids any attempt to break out. Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, promises that air supply can sustain the trapped army. He's wrong. The Luftwaffe can't deliver even a fraction of the supplies needed, and Soviet anti-aircraft fire decimates the transport planes that do try. Through December and January, the Sixth Army slowly starves and freezes to death in the ruins of Stalingrad. Rations are cut again and again. Soldiers eat their horses, then their leather boots. Disease spreads through the trapped army. On February 2, 1943, the last German units in Stalingrad surrender. Of the 91,000 soldiers captured, only about 6,000 will ever return to Germany. The rest die in Soviet captivity. Stalingrad is the turning point. From this moment forward, Germany is retreating in the east. The Red Army begins the long, brutal march toward Berlin, and nothing the Wehrmacht does can stop it permanently. Meanwhile, the war is spreading to other fronts. In North Africa, British forces defeat the German Afrika Korps at the Battle of El Alamein in October-November 1942. American forces land in North Africa in November. By May 1943, all Axis forces in North Africa have surrendered. In July 1943, the Allies invade Sicily. In September, they land on mainland Italy. The Italian government, seeing the writing on the wall, surrenders and switches sides, though German forces continue to fight in Italy for the rest of the war. And above Germany itself, Allied bombers are beginning a systematic campaign of destruction. British bombers attack by night, dropping incendiary bombs on German cities. American bombers attack by day, targeting German industry. The bombing campaign will eventually kill over 400,000 German civilians and destroy much of Germany's urban infrastructure. For Wolfram and other German teenagers, air raids become a regular part of life. Nights spent in bomb shelters, days spent clearing rubble, the constant fear of the sirens announcing another attack. By 1944, Germany is losing on every front. In the east, the Red Army is driving toward Poland and the Baltic states. In Italy, Allied forces are slowly pushing north despite fierce German resistance, and everyone knows that the Western Allies are preparing an invasion of France. The question is where and when. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, that question is answered. Allied forces land on the beaches of Normandy with overwhelming force. Over 150,000 troops come ashore on the first day, supported by thousands of ships and aircraft. Despite fierce German resistance, the Allies establish a beachhead and begin pushing inland. By late August, Paris is liberated. By September, Allied forces have crossed into Belgium and are approaching the German border. In the east, Soviet forces have liberated Belarus and are entering Poland. Romania and Bulgaria switch sides, joining the Allies. Germany is being squeezed from both directions. The question is no longer whether Germany will lose, but when and how many more people will die before it's over. For Wolfram, now 18 years old, the end of childhood is approaching. He's grown up under Nazi rule, witnessed Germany's seemingly miraculous victories turn into catastrophic defeats, survived the bombing raids, and watched as friends and neighbors disappear, some to the military, some to the concentration camps, some simply vanishing in the chaos of war. And in November 1944, he receives the notice that will change his life forever. He's been drafted. November 1944. Wolfram Forster receives his draft notice. He's 18 years old. By this point, the situation is desperate. Germany has lost millions of soldiers. The trained, experienced military that conquered most of Europe in 1939 and 1940 has been ground down in the forests of Russia and the deserts of North Africa. Now the Wehrmacht is drafting teenagers and middle-aged men, rushing them through abbreviated training and sending them to the front with whatever equipment can be scrounged together. Wolfram knows what this means. Everyone knows what this means. But in Nazi Germany, you don't refuse the draft. The penalty for desertion is execution, and your family might be punished too. I was scared, Wolfram admitted years later, but what could you do? You went. The training is brief. There's no time for the lengthy preparation that soldiers received earlier in the war. Germany needs bodies on the front line, and it needs them now. One small moment of normalcy appears on the horizon: Christmas. Even in the depths of war, even as the Reich crumbles, the military plans a Christmas celebration for the troops. For young soldiers like Wolfram, far from home, facing an uncertain future, this promised moment of peace must have seemed precious. But that celebration never happens. In mid-December 1944, Hitler launches his last major offensive on the Western Front. The target is the Ardennes Forest, the same region through which German forces had invaded France in 1940. The goal is audacious: break through the Allied lines, capture the port of Antwerp, split the British and American armies, and force the Western Allies to negotiate peace. It's called Operation Watch on the Rhine. History will remember it as the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler has scraped together every available reserve: tanks, artillery, the last of Germany's fuel supplies, and thrown them into this desperate gamble. The attack begins on December 16th, and initially it works. Bad weather grounds Allied aircraft. German forces achieve complete surprise, smashing through American positions and advancing rapidly. For Wolfram and his fellow soldiers, the Christmas celebration is abruptly canceled. Instead, they're moving toward the front, toward the sounds of artillery and gunfire, toward the last major battle of Hitler's war in the West. The Ardennes offensive represents everything tragic about the final months of World War II. It costs Germany resources it cannot replace. It costs soldiers their lives for a goal that was never realistic. Even if Germany had reached Antwerp, and they didn't, it wouldn't have changed the outcome of the war. The Soviet Union was still advancing from the east. American industrial production was still overwhelming German capacity. The war was lost, but the killing continued. The offensive ultimately fails. By January 1945, Allied forces have stopped the German advance and are pushing back. The bulge in the Allied lines is eliminated. Germany has achieved nothing except delaying its own defeat by a few weeks, at the cost of men and materials it can never replace. Wolfram finds himself at the front during this chaotic period. The experience is nothing like the propaganda films he grew up watching. Modern warfare, especially by 1944 and 1945, is industrial slaughter. Artillery kills more soldiers than any other weapon. You hear the whistle of incoming shells and you have seconds to find cover. Sometimes you don't even hear it, just the explosion, if you survive. Machine guns sweep across the battlefield. Snipers wait for any movement. And above it all, Allied aircraft dominate the sky, strafing and bombing any German position they can find. For a young soldier like Wolfram, it's overwhelming. The noise is constant. The fear is constant. Sleep becomes a luxury. Food is whatever can be scrounged. And the cold, the brutal European winter of 1944 to 1945 is relentless. But then something happens that probably saves Wolfram's life. He falls ill. The exact nature of his illness isn't specified in his account, but he describes fever and chills, possibly influenza, possibly pneumonia, possibly any number of diseases that ravaged armies throughout history. In the unsanitary, exhausted conditions of the front line, illness spreads quickly. Wolfram is evacuated from the front and sent to a hospital in Hamburg. From a military perspective, this is a loss. Another soldier removed from the line. But for Wolfram, it's a reprieve. While he recovers in Hamburg, he's not on the front line, he's not under fire. He has a bed, medical care, and time to heal. But Germany's need for soldiers is so desperate that recovery means return to duty. As soon as Wolfram is well enough, he's reassigned. The question is, where? I didn't know if they would send me to the Eastern Front or keep me in the West, Wolfram recalled. That was all you thought about. Everyone knew the Eastern Front was worse. This wasn't paranoia. The war on the Eastern Front was conducted with a brutality that exceeded even the terrible standards of World War II. Hitler had ordered that the war against the Soviet Union would be a war of annihilation, not bound by the normal rules of warfare. The result was atrocities on both sides, a cycle of revenge and counter-revenge that left millions dead. For German soldiers, being captured by the Soviets was something to be avoided at almost any cost. Soviet treatment of German POWs was harsh, and given what German forces had done in the Soviet Union, perhaps understandably so. Many German prisoners sent to Soviet labor camps never returned. In contrast, American and British forces generally followed the Geneva Conventions regarding prisoners of war. Surrender to Western Allied forces meant survival was likely. Surrender to Soviet forces meant your fate was uncertain at best. So when Wolfram learns he's being assigned to defend Salzwedel, a small town in central Germany, against advancing American forces, there's a grim relief. He'll be facing the Americans, not the Soviets. Salzwedel is not a strategic stronghold. It's not a fortress or a critical industrial center. It's just a town, one of thousands across Germany, that happens to be in the path of the Allied advance. But orders are orders. Wolfram and his unit are to defend this town against the overwhelming might of the United States Army. April 1945. The war has entered its final phase. From the east, Soviet forces are fighting their way into Berlin itself. From the west, American and British forces are sweeping across Germany, capturing town after town. The Nazi regime is collapsing, but it continues to order its remaining forces to fight on. Wolfram and his unit take up defensive positions around Salzwedel. They dig in, set up machine gun nests, prepare for the Americans to arrive. But what can they really hope to accomplish? They're exhausted, undersupplied teenage soldiers facing one of the best equipped, best trained military forces in human history. And then the Americans arrive. The firefight that follows is chaos. This is what we glimpsed at the beginning of this video. Wolfram pinned down, unable to move, bullets cracking overhead. In combat, time becomes strange. Seconds feel like hours. Your entire world shrinks to the patch of ground you're pressed against, and the sounds of death all around you. I couldn't move, Wolfram remembered. Every time I tried to lift my head, the shooting would start again. I just pressed myself into the ground and waited. How long does he lie there? Minutes? Hours? In his memory, it's an eternity. And then suddenly, the shooting stops. The silence must be almost as frightening as the gunfire. What does it mean? Are the Americans flanking his position? Are they calling in artillery? Is this the moment before the end? But then Wolfram hears American voices, boots approaching, commands in English. He's captured. American soldiers pull him to his feet, search him for weapons, and motion for him to move. Wolfram Forster's war is over. He's a prisoner of war, but he's alive. For many German soldiers in the final weeks of the war, capture by American forces came as a relief. The alternative, fighting to the death in a lost cause or facing Soviet capture, was far worse. And American treatment of prisoners, while not luxurious, was generally humane. Wolfram is processed along with other prisoners, moved from place to place as the Allied advance continues. Around him, Germany is dying. Cities are in ruins. The government has ceased to function. Refugees clog the roads. The scale of destruction is almost incomprehensible. On April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler commits suicide in his bunker in Berlin. A week later, on May 7th, Germany unconditionally surrenders. The war in Europe is over. Wolfram has survived. Against odds that killed millions of his generation, he's still alive. But what comes next? The immediate aftermath of the war is a period of profound uncertainty. Germany is occupied by the Allied powers, divided into zones of control. Millions of prisoners of war are being held in camps, waiting to learn their fate. Millions of displaced persons are trying to find their way home. Cities are rubble. The economy has collapsed. And the full horror of what the Nazi regime did, the concentration camps, the genocide, the systematic murder of 6 million Jews and millions of others, is being revealed to a shocked world. For Wolfram, the months after his capture are a blur of camps and uncertainty. Where is his family? Are they alive? What will happen to Germany? What will happen to him? You didn't know anything, Wolfram recalled. You were just waiting to find out if you would see your family again, waiting to find out what kind of future you could have. Gradually, the situation stabilizes. Prisoners are processed and released. Communication is slowly restored. And eventually, after about a year of uncertainty, Wolfram is reunited with his family. They've survived. In a war that killed somewhere between 70 and 85 million people worldwide, his family has survived. It's an outcome that millions of others did not receive. But surviving the war is just the beginning. Now comes the work of building a life in a devastated country, processing what happened, and trying to find meaning in a world that has been torn apart. For Wolfram, the path forward leads away from Germany entirely. He emigrates to the United States. Think about what this means. A former German soldier, someone who wore the uniform of the Wehrmacht, choosing to move to one of the countries that defeated Germany. It speaks to Wolfram's character and his desire to leave the past behind, to start fresh in a new world. In America, Wolfram pursues his dream of becoming a doctor. He goes to medical school, trains in medicine, and builds a career helping others. The young man who was drafted into a war machine becomes a healer. But the story takes another remarkable turn. Wolfram doesn't just become a doctor. He joins the United States Army Medical Corps. The former Wehrmacht soldier becomes a United States Army officer, eventually rising to the rank of colonel. Let that sink in for a moment. A teenager drafted into Hitler's army in 1944, captured by American forces in 1945, becomes a colonel in the U.S. Army. It's a journey that encompasses the entire arc of the mid-20th century, from the depths of World War II to the hope of a new beginning in America. Wolfram builds a successful career. He builds a life. He builds a family. By any measure, he has achieved the American dream: success, respect, service to his adopted country. But the war never completely leaves him. Wolfram Forster's story is one of thousands that need to be preserved. Every day we're losing World War II veterans. In a few years, there will be none left. When they're gone, their first-hand accounts, the texture and detail that brings history to life, will be gone too. That's why projects like Memoirs of WWII exist. We're racing against time to record these stories, to sit down with veterans and let them share their experiences in their own words before it's too late. These aren't just stories about war. They're stories about resilience, about the human capacity to survive and rebuild. They're stories about how ordinary people cope with extraordinary circumstances. They're lessons about the cost of totalitarianism, the dangers of unchecked power, and the importance of defending democratic institutions. Wolfram could have chosen to never speak about his experiences. Many veterans, from all sides of the conflict, made that choice. The memories were too painful, too complicated, too difficult to process. But by sharing his story, Wolfram has given us a gift. He's helped us understand a piece of history that's often reduced to simple narratives of good versus evil. The reality was more complex, the suffering was more widespread, and the lessons are more urgent than we sometimes realize. When Wolfram watches war on television and sees the same destruction he witnessed in 1945, he is reminding us that war isn't abstract. It's not just about strategies and statistics. It's about individuals whose lives are forever changed. It's about homes destroyed and families torn apart. It's about trauma that echoes across decades. His journey from German soldier to American colonel is remarkable, but perhaps the most important part of his story is the simplest. He survived, and he chose to build rather than destroy. He chose healing over bitterness. He chose to serve others rather than dwell on his own suffering. That's a lesson we can all take from the generation that fought World War II. They experienced the worst of humanity, but many of them responded by trying to build a better world. They created the institutions that have helped prevent another world war. They fought for civil rights and human dignity. They raised families and built communities. If you found Wolfram's story meaningful, I encourage you to support projects that preserve these veterans' memories. Share this video. Talk to the elderly veterans in your own community while you still can. And remember that history isn't just something that happened in the past. It's being created right now by the choices we make about how to live together. Thank you for watching Memoirs of World War II. These stories matter, these voices matter, and it's up to us to make sure they're not forgotten.